No risk it, no biscuit.
Coming from the Arizona desert, presented by SBNation.com. For Arizona Cardinals fans, by Arizona Cardinals fans, with outsider and insider's perspective, this is Revenge of the Birds. Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans. This is Revenge of the Birds Radio. I'm your host, Jess Root, soon to be joined by co-host Seth Cox, and welcome back to another show of Arizona Cardinals Talk, talking Arizona Cardinals football as we do every week during the season and preseason. And if you catch our other show when we preview the next game with an opposing team blogger, writer of some sort, that will be the case again this week. But again, Arizona Cardinals talking Revenge of the Birds Radio. And I'm host Jess Root. If you would like to give us a call today, you can hear us live. You can talk to us live at 646-478-3787. We've got a lot to talk about in today's show. And again, I'd like to thank you for listening, whether you're listening via download, as you may likely be doing, or if you're listening to the show live. Of course, you can call in live. Again, that number is 646-478-3787. Or if you'd like to comment, give us a question via Twitter. If you are listening offline, you can hit me up at Twitter at Senor Jessroot, SENORJESSROOT, or my site Twitter account, which is Revenge of the Birds, at Revenge of Birds. Or you can become a member of SB Nation's Revenge of the Birds website, which is our Arizona Cardinals team site. It's free to join, free to participate, and you can comment, read. The content's great, if I do say so myself. And you have a great community of Arizona Cardinals fans. I would have to say probably the best that you can find on the internet, the best fans in terms of Arizona Cardinals. And this show is brought to you tonight, however you're listening to it. This show is brought to you by Audible.com, and the internet's largest producer, largest content provider for audio. And you can try out the service for free. Audible.com. Again, you can get audio downloads, you can get audio books, you can get podcasts. There are literally hundreds of thousands of different audio material you can access on Audible.com. For Revenge of the Birds Radio's listeners, we have a special offer for you. If you'd go to audibletrial.com/Revenge of the Birds, you can test out the service. And you get to try the service out for a month for free, including receiving a free audiobook download. Check it out. Sign up for it. That's audibletrial.com/Revenge of the Birds. And you get yourself your free audiobook download to test out the service. We're going to be talking, the big thing that happened, we had a football game on Saturday. The Arizona Cardinals traveled to Minnesota, and they looked good early on, and then built the lead. They were up as much as 21-13 in the second half. And Teddy Bridgewater, the first-round rookie that the Vikings drafted, with a comeback win, 17 fourth-quarter points to lead the Vikings to victory 30-28, and not in the fashion you'd think. We'll talk a little bit about it, some of the funky plays. The Cardinals almost came away with a win on the strangest of plays you might ever see. We're going to talk about that. However, the biggest news is on the injury front. A couple of things is that early this week, Darnell Dockett was carted off of practice with a knee injury, had an MRI, and it was found, as was suspected it could be and was feared, that he tore his ACL in his right knee, and he is done for the 2014 season before it even starts. On a happier note, on a more positive note, the Cardinals activated both Tyrann Mathieu and Alameda Ta'amu from the PUP list, the physically unable to perform list, meaning they are back at practice, at least in some fashion, starting Wednesday. And there is optimism. Again, there's there's blossoming optimism that Mathieu might be able to play in the season opener on Monday Night Football against the San Diego Padres. So we've got a lot to talk about. We've got Seth Cox on the line. We actually have a live caller on the line, or a caller on the line if you're listening to this via download. We have a caller on the line. He's waiting to give his 2 cents in about the Darnell Dockett situation. But let's bring on Seth tonight. Tell us, Seth, how are you doing tonight?
Doing good, Jess. How are you?
Great. Glad to have you on as always. We're going to talk Arizona Cardinals football again. This is Revenge of the Birds Radio. You can call us if you're listening live, 646-478-3787. We're going to jump ahead a little bit since we got the caller on the line, Seth, and we're going to jump straight to the Darnell Dockett injury. Obviously bad news, obviously very unfortunate, and it just continues with the streak of misfortune in terms of important players going down in the preseason. Now, this wasn't a preseason game. It was just during practice, but that makes it 4 straight years where at least the Cardinals have lost a starter before the season even started. 2011, it was Greg Toller who tore his ACL, and secondarily, it was Ryan Williams, the torn patella tendon. He was not expected to be a starter, but he was supposed to be a key contributor. 2012, Levi Brown goes down in the preseason, sent the offensive line into a tailspin of horror. Last season, it was rookie Jonathan Cooper, who we're going to talk a little bit about, who still is not quite where everyone would like him to be. There's all sorts of talk whether it's wavering between bust or give him time, or bust or give him time, or somewhere in between. Is he tough enough? Is he injury prone? Is he Levi Brown? Whole bunch of stuff we're hearing about, at least on our community, Revenge of the Birds. And now last year was Jonathan Cooper, and now 2014, the heart and soul of the Arizona Cardinals defense, probably the heart and soul of the entire franchise at this time, Darnell Dockett out for this season. And honestly, this is going to be one of those things we don't know if he'll even come back. He has 1 year left on his deal after this year with a big salary cap number. It'll be interesting what decisions are made in the offseason. But first, what was your first reaction? Obviously, Seth, you were the one to post it on Revenge of the Birds first. I wasn't at my computer, so I thank you for that, for getting it up on the site first. The report that he went down in practice, he was carted off the field, and from there, what was your reaction as a fan first and foremost when you heard the Dockett news?
For me, the first thing I thought was, man, here we go again. If you would have asked me, God forbid, before it happened, who would be the one player on defense that we could lose, and I would feel like they wouldn't miss a beat, and I probably would have said Dockett. And that's not a shot at who he is as a player. It's just that he's 33, I think, now, and he's lost a step. He's not the player he once was. He's a very effective player on rundowns still, but he's not the pass rushing threat he was. I think he ended up with 3.5 or 4.5 sacks last year, most of which came in the New Orleans Saints game. And I think you can get his production from Ed Stinson, the rookie fifth rounder out of Alabama, and then veteran Frosty Rucker, and maybe mix in a little Kareem Martin on passing downs. And I think he'll be okay production-wise. I think one of the things that a lot of people, at least on have kind of overlooked and kind of just passed off, was the idea that he's not a leader, and I think that's just wrong. I think he's a defensive captain. He's a guy that a lot of these guys look up to in terms of just experience and knowledge along the defensive line. He's a warrior. I mean, he's missed 2 games before, obviously, this in his 10-year career. One was a suspension, so I mean, he's missed only 1 game because of injury in his whole career. You just have to kind of look at it from that angle. That production-wise, I don't think you're going to miss much, but the intangibles, the things that you can't really gauge, obviously, we'll just have to wait and see.
All right. Before I talk about some of the other concepts, we have this caller on the line. I'm going to bring him on. He has some comments, some thoughts. He said almost a monologue, but he's been waiting. Actually, called into the show before I even got on, so let's bring him on. If you would introduce yourself, sir, and tell us a little bit about what you think about the whole Dockett situation.
Hey, how you doing, guys?
Doing all right.
My
Thanks
name's
for
John.
calling in.
Yeah, I just want to put a unique perspective on this Darnell Dockett injury. Right now, it's pretty bad hearing about Dockett out for the season. Not only that, but losing Daryl Washington, Dansby. But right now, though, it seems the media and fans are treating this like this is the Cardinals' last straw, and now they're destined for another lost season. But here's my opinion. I think that the despair people are feeling right now about the Cards team as a whole is because of the distrust in the offense. And now that the team has to rely on it, it's hard to be convinced that the offense can put enough points on the board for them to win games. Can the O-line keep up Carson Palmer? Can Carson play better this season, be reliable enough this season not to cause the Cards to lose games? I think this team still has the ability to make the playoffs, but winning the division seems like a stretch because of those losses on the defense. But they still have an elite secondary. The receivers are better than they have been in a long while, and the O-line has greatly improved from last year. So I don't think it's time to call it quits this season as far as a playoff run. I would predict 10 wins like last year. Whether that gets them into the playoffs this year, that remains to be seen. But the offense has got to lead from now.
All right. Thanks, John. Really appreciate that. You got to bring us some really good points. And, well, Seth, give your thoughts about what John said.
I think when you talk about the national media, I think a lot of things that have been said have been overblown. The first thing, the thing that's underlooked at by Cardinals fans is been the loss of the inside linebackers, I guess I should say. But on the flip side, I think the thing that's being overblown here is the Dockett, injury. Again, you're going to lose something because Dockett has been, kind of that rock on the left side for a while. So obviously something's going to change. But, from what I've seen, I'm not concerned about productivity-wise losing too much. Again, it's going to be more of a aspect of what he brought to the huddle, what he brought to the locker room, juicing the guys up at that sort. But I think one of the things that you hit on that was exactly right, John, is that you're going to have to see the offense win games. And my concern with that ideal is more that you're in the NFC West, which is probably has three of the better defenses, not including the Cardinals, and I'm not saying that in a bad way, but three of the better defenses in the NFL already. So if the Cardinals aren't at least on the same level as maybe the Rams defensively, how much better offensively do they have to be to get to the playoffs? You look at what they did last year. And John kind of hit on it. It was the defense that carried the offense, and now we're switching the roles. And you look at what the Seahawks did in the playoffs to those offensive first teams, the Saints, obviously the Broncos in the Super Bowl, and the Saints game was close, but again, it always turned out that defense won games. That's kind of what you're asking in this division. So you're hoping that your offense is now better than the Seahawks and 49ers and maybe even the Rams defense. And I think that might be a tall task and, maybe something that's a little understated by Cardinals fans at this time.
And likewise, I don't know if there's so much despair because of the offense. I think that there are real concerns with the defense. But at least some of those off the despair about that John refers to offensively has been subsided quite a bit because of the effectiveness that we've seen, and frankly because of the hype of the offense, of how good can this offense be with the added depth at receiver, with a more full-time Andre Ellington, with a second year in the offense in Carson Palmer, the improved offensive line. I think there's probably a little too much optimism in some ways for thinking that the Cardinals are going to suddenly become, I'm sure they have the talent to do it, but all of a sudden going to become the Denver Broncos of offense while maintaining their Cardinals stance on defense. It seems really, I don't know, it seems almost It's good. It's good. Fans, we need to have that. We should be excited about the off season for the coming season. That way, there's not that way it doesn't start off the season in indifference. But I think while you bring up the point, I wrote the same thing about how the Cardinals can weather the defensive on-field loss of Dockett. It isn't. There are reasons to be concerned, and you've brought them up before. For the defense, I mean, you've got two significant players coming off of major surgery. You have the loss of Carlos Dansby. You have the loss of Darrell Washington. You add a young, talented safety, and John just went ahead and left us. And I thank you very much, John, for calling in. It was much appreciated. Great to talk about. And you bring in a young, you've got Tony Jefferson, and now you bring in Deion Buchanan as a safety, very talented, but still unproven in terms of, are they going to be able to fix? Is that going to fix their problems against tight ends? There's a lot of reasons to be concerned about that defense, and I'll talk about a little bit about you've brought it up, but in terms of on-field production, you said it, I'll say it again. You can replace what Dockett did, and I know there was somebody on offense, on Twitter who was saying how I could say that Frosty Rucker could replace the production. I'm like, wait. Yes, Frosty Rucker, he was a decent starter before coming to Arizona when he became a backup. In fact, if you look over the last 3 seasons, and Rucker, who played basically 2 years as a starter, one is where he had very limited snaps last year, he has 1.5 sack less than Dockett, and his tackle numbers outside of last year are very similar to Dockett's before. And we've seen Rucker in the preseason so far, and in training camp, he's been very disruptive. He's a very capable player. He's veteran. He I don't know what it is about my internet the past couple of... I'm sorry, you still there, Seth?
I am, Jess. I didn't know if it was mine.
Gosh.
I grabbed my cell phone to call you, so I wasn't sure what's going on.
What is that? I don't know what the deal is. All of a sudden, what is this internet thing doing? All of a sudden, this drops me and I'm talking. All of a sudden, boop, I'm off the internet. So anyhow... Where did I get cut off, by the way?
Frosty Rucker's been doing a good job, as you were saying. He's been very disruptive. He's a veteran presence, like you said. He's only going to be 31 this year, so he's too young than Darnell. He's done exactly kind of what you were hinting at. He's done very similar to Darnell. He hasn't been on the Cardinals except until last year. And now, Cardinals fans are getting to know him, and he's not maybe as dominant in his highs, but I don't think he has the same lows. That's what I would say about Frosty.
I would have to agree. And people talk about Dockett's rebirth on Todd Bowles' defense. If you look at the numbers, he had 3 sacks against New Orleans, and let's put perspective. He's 4.5 sacks for Dockett. That was good. That was a much better season. But you have to look. 3 of them came against New Orleans, and he was lined up against a right guard who was an undrafted rookie making his first NFL start. Dockett did exactly what you would expect anyone to do against anyone. Kind of like what you would expect to have happened in 2012 when you had DeAnthony Batista at left tackle. Abomination. And so I don't want to take away from the type of player Dockett is, because he's a very good player. He is no longer elite. He at one time one of the most feared defensive players in the league, and rightfully so. He has been a bit miscast in terms of where he fits better on a defensive line. Obviously, he's a much more effective 4-3 tackle, either than a 3-4 end, or even he's a 3-4. He's not a nose tackle. He's a defensive tackle, according to the Arizona Cardinals defensive names. But on the field, between Frosty Rucker and Ed Stinson, they're gonna be fine on the field. I will contend I will heavily contend anyone who says that his leadership won't be missed. His leadership will be missed. When Bruce Arians came to the team, he became Dockett became the vocal leader. He leads defensive huddles. He leads the huddles in the locker room. He leads cheers. Much like that's the part that fans that we really have a hard time. I have a hard. It's not something you can quantify because it's something, it's just something you can't really measure. But the respect he has in that locker room, just what he is worth to that. Just like Dansby a year ago, Jeremiah Bell. They've lost a lot of leadership between now he and Jeremiah Bell and Carlos Dansby. And then you add on top of that, well, John Abraham missed half the training camp, and so he's in terms of respect, well, he's respected as for his on-field play. He has to build some of that veteran respect again because of the time he missed. Luckily, as I wrote today, they have added some veteran players like Antonio Cromartie. They added Larry Foote. Lorenzo Alexander's still there. And Rucker, he's still there as a veteran. But it's different. It's a different situation. They're newer to the team. Dockett was the elder statesman, kind of like how Adrian Wilson was. It was always Wilson and Dockett and Fitz. Now you no longer have Wilson. You'll no longer have Dockett, at least for on the field. Yes, he'll still be there, but he can't practice with the team, so that leadership is different. He will still be the presence. He'll still be in the locker room, but he won't be participating in team activities. Who do you think is going to step out? And how much? Let's talk. Frosty Rucker talked about Ed Stinson. How quick do you think he can be this year? What type of production can we expect out of him?
When I covered the draft for Arizona Sports this year, one of the things I wrote about Ed Stinson when he was drafted was just about how impressive he is to watch play and do kind of the yeoman's work of what is on the defensive line. He's such a 3-4 defensive end. It's kind of hilarious to watch because he's not Calais Campbell. He's not at all like a J.J. Watt. He's more of a Brett Kiesel type guy. Somebody that they were looking at today in terms of bringing in after the injury. That's the type of guy he is. He's not this fiercely athletic guy that's going to go get 12, 13 sacks in a season. He's a guy that you can plug in. He's going to do his job every down, every game, and you kind of just forget, overlook, don't have to worry about him stuff, and that's what he does. And I think it's where he can be one day. Obviously not yet. That's why he went in the 5th round. But that's kind of his career ceiling, something he can do as a player, and I think that's what you can maybe see from him. You kind of look at Kiesel's numbers over his career. You're talking 5.5 sacks is his career high,
and 29 and 11 seasons total. So that's not quite 3 a year. So
yeah, that's what you can expect from Stinson. He's not, although I will say, and it's against 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, and 5th team. But Stinson's looked much better, much more athletic, much quicker than I expected him to in preseason than he did on his college tape. One of the things that we talked about a little bit in one of the comment sections at Revenge of the Birds was, Stinson through the meat grind that is the Alabama football program. So one, he's going to come in and he's probably maxed out athletically of where he is, but he's also going to be completely disciplined. He's a system fit, and he can do a lot of talented, good things for this defense. I think run defense, you're going to be talking about a guy that's probably maybe no drop-off at all from Darnell Dockett, slight drop-off. Obviously, you're not going to give him all 60 snaps in a game, but if you're talking 30 between he and Frosty each, and 10 from Isaac Sopowaga, as it sounds like they may sign him, I think or 10 from Kareem Martin even, I think you're going to be happy with that.
Let's talk a little about that, because they've taken a look at Isaac Sopoaga, a guy that, he's a guy. I mean, he's played a lot of games. His effectiveness is in question now. But I'm looking here. I don't know what the rush is. This is my opinion. Whoops, sorry about that. I don't know if the rush is to go pick up some veteran guy. I already see on the roster, and even when Dockett was healthy, I already saw more defensive linemen that they could possibly use. Including Dockett, there were 7 defensive linemen that they were going to have on the roster, and last year all they carried were 6, and they only played 5. So unless Stinson was going to do nothing, he's going to be inactive, or is Kareem Martin going to go be inactive, or I'm not sure what. Are they planning to move either Dan Williams or Alameda Ta'amu? Granted, and so now you take Dockett out of the picture. You've got 6 defensive linemen. Perhaps you want a 7th guy at least early in the season until Alameda is healthy. But unless it's for that, I don't see it's being a guy. I don't see them needing that guy and a veteran guy on the defensive line, especially when you've got some young guys. You've got a Bruce Gaston who's shown some flashes, or a Christian Tupo, or I don't know how you pronounce it. I'm usually pretty good about names. That name gets me. But that have a little bit of a track record, rather than a guy who's older, doesn't know the system, and while will have a veteran presence, hasn't been there with the team, so he won't have that presence early on.
Right, and I think the plan was Kareem Martin and Ed Stinson weren't going to get a whole lot of run this year, and then Stinson's kind of played himself into some time on the field, and Kareem Martin is going to still be the guy that's kind of the odd man out. Will play you on downs where you're going to get after the quarterback, and that's kind of what you'll be this year. Because if you watch him the first games, and I know you've watched him, but I don't know how much the listeners have paid close attention to him. He's kind of a fish out of water at this point in terms of just style and what in comfort level. He just doesn't look comfortable at all in what he's being asked to do, and that's expected. He's coming from college. He never really understood how to use his athleticism in college to make plays, or I shouldn't say that. He only used his athleticism. He never really knew or understood how to put that into technique, and it's just something that it's going to take some time. It's going to take some learning to get to. But he's going to learn from probably the second best defensive end in the NFL, and Calais Campbell, and he's built like Calais Campbell, so I think it'll be okay. Like you said on Sopoaga, he's a nose tackle first off, so I don't understand.
And they've already got two. They've already got 2 really big guys of those.
Yeah, and I don't understand the fit. I understood Kiesel in the sense that Rucker, is been a part-time player for the last couple of years. Stinson and Martin are rookies. Let's bring in Kiesel. Maybe he can, shore up the position in case those guys kind of flop, and we know what we're going to get from him. It's not going to be spectacular, but it's not going to be anything, where you're going to have to worry. But Sopoaga, he's been really down the last couple of years, especially in New England last year. So I'm kind of confused by it, admittedly, but we'll see if they actually sign him.
And maybe he is to be that second nose guy in the wake of Ta'amu's recovery. Yes, he's off PUP, and obviously they want him back before week 7. So maybe that's the case. Maybe they bring him on as Dan Williams' main backup to split time with Williams until Ta'amu's healthy. And if Ta'amu proves to be healthy, maybe he doesn't even make the team. I don't know. Let's turn to the football game we saw on Saturday. What were the takeaways? Let's talk about the good, because we've been down about the injuries, and we'll have plenty of time to criticize. So, what was the good that you could take away from that game against the Vikings?
I think you have to take away the fact that the first team offense looked good. They were efficient. It's kind of hard to really judge a team when the first drive you had a big play that was a great play by Tyrann Brown, but I mean I think anybody would admit he broke, and I use that term broke two tackles.
He shook off a tackle. He shook it, didn't break it. He shook it off.
Yeah, and so I think that's, you're talking 14 plays for the starters. It's not, a lot to go off of. And I thought they were efficient, they were effective, and that's what you want to see in the preseason. I am concerned about maybe the lack of urgency. Maybe that's the word I want to use in the run game. That they don't seem to, one, be concerned about it, but two, they also don't seem too concerned to get a lot of game reps going about fixing a lot of the problems that are in the run game. I mean, I know Sendeline's out, but you can still try and run the football a little bit more than what they have in the first two games. I think that would be like my biggest, if you were to talk concern. I think Ellington has, 4 carries. So the first team offense has run the ball 4 times in the first 2 games. Obviously, they've only played like a combined, 20 plays or something crazy low like that. But still, you'd like to see a little bit more effort put into the run game. Defensively, it's just technique stuff at this point for me. You're seeing a lot of, Patrick Peterson struggled a little bit against Minnesota. Dayon Buchanan was in good spots at times and couldn't make plays, or he was in a bad spot because he got beat early. He should have given up a touchdown pass that Kyle Rudolph dropped. And then I don't know who they gave that touchdown pass to that Rudolph did catch and run for 52 yards. But, that's still a concern about the tight ends. And then I think you have to be really, really excited about how good the defense is still. Obviously it's to be seen what happens after the Dockett injury, but you and I have hit on that enough. And I think the last thing that you can say can be a concern coming from the game is lack of the ability to get to the quarterback. I just think that's where you kind of you want to see a little more.
Well, and I actually think they did better against Minnesota even early on because they were getting pressure. They just couldn't finish the deal. We saw Calais Campbell break free. I think we saw Frosty Rucker on another break free. I think Sam Acho got in there once, but they just didn't make the play. They either were outrun or Matt Castle ran for 16 yards on one scramble. It's not something you want to see happen, but it is the preseason. Obviously, the most positive thing that you saw from my perspective, is that the offense from the short stint against Houston, another short stint against Minnesota, looked crisp. Now, we get to see more of that against Cincinnati because they're going to play no more than a half. But what I hope to see is more than just the quick start. You want the quick start, but you don't want to see it lull, because we've seen that from the Cardinals before, where they start quickly and you want to kind of keep the foot on the gas pedal there a little bit and see if they can maintain that sort of offensive momentum for more than one drive. Now, granted, we did see that they had the touchdown and then they had a punt, so that wasn't as encouraging. And then you look at, oh my gosh, the receivers are just awesome. And people are talking about Tyrann Brown as this, wow, he's going to be their 5th receiver. He's not going to see any time on the field. That's the amazing thing. And he looks like he has legit talent. His consistency is there. He's making great catches. He's doing the dirty work. He makes blocks. He goes to special teams. And so there's a lot to be optimistic about. But the fact that he's going to be their 5th receiver, he's not going to do anything during the season unless there's an injury. And so that's the good. The receivers continue to look great. Carson Palmer is still, he looks like he knows what he's doing. And, yeah, I was really I was really encouraged by that overall. Now, let's turn to the ugly side. This is where, so you get to have your fun. What was the bad? What was the bad? What are the takeaways from that game?
I think the first thing you look at least for me, and I was excited to watch him play, was how bad Earl Watford was in that game. He was okay. It wasn't great. I think that's a combination of, again, not a ton of reps in the run game, although he did play more reps than the rest of the starters. And then he got absolutely destroyed on the Carson Palmer. I don't think it was even a sack. It was just a knockdown, but or no, they didn't give up a sack. That's right. It was just, a quarterback hit, and man, Sharif Floyd made him look silly, and then just came through and drilled Palmer, and that's not something you want to see. I think from there, again, the run game, you're concerned about the lack of push from any of the offensive line sets that you saw. And then I'll go on a different side, and I'll see what you think about this. But I was very disheartened, I guess would be the right word, with the fact that Arians gave Lindley the entire second half. I know this was the plan. I understand that. But, man, did that seem like a lot of wasted reps, a lot of missed reps for a or for a Logan Thomas to get where he could, again, get 15 NFL throws in a game situation that you can't recreate in practice. That was kind of frustrating.
And I was okay with that because if for anything else, obviously Bruce Arians likes Ryan Lindley. Ken Wisenhunt liked Ryan Lindley. There was something about him. He's really bright. Based on Ken Wisenhunt turned from John Skelton to Ryan Lindley because of what he saw from him in practice. He was able to handle everything that was thrown at him. Obviously, what we've seen in the game setting, it doesn't quite work the same. We saw a couple of really nice throws, a couple of head scratchers, and then you're like, oh my gosh, what in the world happened down near the goal line? And then that drive. I was okay with Ryan Lindley getting this, especially since, in part, it was for him to get some good game tape. It ended up being wasted. But especially to be put in that situation because they ran the ball a ton, they went down from the score. To have him in this situation to be able to show off, he failed when they were down those points after Minnesota went ahead. It just failed. It just didn't work out. So I don't have any problem with the Lindley deal. I didn't like the Cardinals' inability to get off the field when they had the chance defensively to get off the field. And in part of the second half, and I wrote about this. Oh, the bad. It would have been terrible. I mean, I wrote this the other day about the having Teddy Bridgewater come back, and when that's good for everyone, it's actually good for everyone, even Cardinals fans. Because the truth is, if the Cardinals win that game on that disgusting abomination of a fluky play where Ryan Lindley fumbles the snap, John Estes bats it to the side, and Zach Nallman runs it. If they win the game on that, and it's not for a real game, you've gained nothing because you didn't get any good game tape on any player at all, except maybe John Estes and maybe Zach Bauman for picking up. He's a running back. He picked the ball up and run. It's really a terrible way to win the game for a game that doesn't mean anything because you didn't get really anyone making plays. That whole drive was terrible. That whole drive was disgusting because it went incomplete pass, penalty, incomplete pass, but luckily there was the personal foul, so they got first down. Next throw, there's the pass interference, although it was a close call. Some say they definitely had the jersey. It was one of those calls where maybe it wasn't, so it was almost a gift. The overthrow fell. That should have been a touchdown. Then the back end zone. Then Lindley throws the ball to the back of the end zone to Buckner when he has Powell there on the goal line wide open. That should have been 2 touchdowns they scored. And then the fumble, and then the fourth down play, it's a fumbled snap that they managed to score on. That drive was drive was ridiculous. And in some ways, you don't want, especially on a preseason game, you don't want to use up your good karma your good win karma on a preseason game and you win a game because of that. Lose it now, have the rookie quarterback come in and lead you down the field and get all the press. Hey, Teddy. That was a terrible drive. It was very entertaining to watch as a fan. You're like, oh, they scored a touchdown, but it was mockingly. It was you couldn't take that drive seriously because of how comically bad it was.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things that I was kind of discouraged with, and I haven't gotten to it this week, but that I'm going to try to write about tonight or tomorrow, is just kind of I was disappointed with the outside of John Brown and Ed Stinson. I was kind of disappointed with the rookie class as a whole. Walt Powell, he was open a couple times. It's hard to blame receivers if they're not getting the ball thrown to them, so I shouldn't be too hard on Powell, but he did struggle again run blocking, and that's something that Arians receivers need to do. I've been kind of disenchanted with how they're using Troy Nicholas thus far. I don't know how you feel about it, but again, I think he only played like 14 or 15 plays, and he only ran 8 pass routes. I think that's more than he did last time, and Ryan Lindley was his quarterback most of the time, so kill the kid, but he's not really, I don't think he has a reception thus far. I don't. I'm certain he does not. He does not. He hasn't even been targeted once. So again, it's really hard to tell from the kind of the game tape, because you don't have the all 22 where you can see from the end zone angle where a guy is, if he's open, if he's getting open. The broadcast angle just doesn't give you that ability. But I've been it's weird because you want to see him get to work on what he struggles with, which is getting open and catching the ball, and he's been doing a lot of what he's already good at, which is kind of being that sixth offensive lineman that we talked about after they drafted him, and letting him block a lot. Again, it's not a bad good blocker, but in the preseason, I think, at least for me, you want to see guys work on what they struggle with in game situations, as opposed to doing what they're already good at in game situations. So that's been that's been frustrating for me to see. I don't know how you feel about it.
I haven't noticed that. That's kind of one of the things. My games, I tend to spend looking at formations. I didn't get it charted since I learned watching live TV is a terrible way to try to chart the formations that the offense and the defense are doing, just because you can't see the press box is easy. It's terribly difficult if you're watching it live. That's really hard.
The broadcast angle of the NFL game is really only good to watch the offensive and defensive line, and then whoever's getting the ball.
Yeah, so I tend to be focused on that. I haven't paid as much attention to how they're using their rookies. It's interesting to see where certain rookies are and how this regime with Steve Keim and Bruce Arians doing the drafting, how so far, much how Ken Wisenhunt went at the beginning, there isn't a lot of criticism of how they're using the rookies or how they're performing. Ryan Williams, he was a Steve Keim guy. He kind of busted. Jonathan Cooper, obviously there's the injuries, the recovery. He's not back to Jonathan Cooper status. You look at the Ryan Swope pick. Alex Okafor, there was a lot of talk of him in the off season, beginning of training camp a little bit, and then he sort of disappeared. So you look at, now granted they have hit the jackpot in Mathieu and Ellington, or hopefully continue to hit the jackpot with Ellington. John Brown looks like a home run so far. It's just interesting to see how perception remains to be that Keim and Arians can do no wrong when you're seeing some of the same things going on as you did with the Wisenhunt regime.
I do think it's interesting because Deone Buchanan's not number one on the depth chart yet. And that was one of the giant criticism of the Wisenhunt regime, was that, you know, he never gave rookies a chance. You know, so that's,
and the thing is that that's not even really true. He just didn't put them out there until they knew what they were doing. I understand why Wisenhunt did that. He didn't just put out Denny Green said, okay, take your lumps. Ken Wisenhunt eased them in. So he said, okay, you can do this well now. You do this. Now we're going to make you a starter because now you understand what you're doing, because he didn't want to put them out there to be stupid and just be terrible. So I get why he did it. And he ended up playing rookies every year because of injury. But yeah, Arians really isn't any different. He's just more open about willing to play young players when he has to.
And you know what? I think you talked about him a little bit, and I meant to bring this up in the positives, and I just completely spaced it as I go back over my notes. Alex Okafor is like, all of a sudden, he's Matt Shaughnessy 2.0 as a run defender. I've been really impressed with Okafor's ability in the run game, and I think he and Shaughnessy, whether it be this year or next year, whenever it kind of happens, is going to end up being a really formidable run defensive outside linebacker duo. Now they just got somebody that can rush the passer. Obviously, right now they're hoping that's still Abraham, but from there, I was thoroughly impressed with what he did as a run defender, especially in the Minnesota game. But you know, so far in the preseason, I thought he's been, you know, kind of nails in that regard.
Well, and if you look at both their background, what was Shaughnessy before coming to Arizona? His entire career, he was the defensive end, a 4-3 end, and when he signed here, like, what? He's going to play outside linebacker? And you kind of look at him out there, and he's kind of like, you kind of wonder, why is he playing outside linebacker? He's basically a defensive end out on the edge, and that's kind of how Okafor is too. Built big, he's strong. And that's what Okafor played in college, too. So, I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense that turns out. Unfortunately, Arian said that these guys, Okafor and Shaughnessy, they need another pass rush move. They need a counter move to be effective. Obviously, Okafor was extremely productive in college, but he needs another move on top of that, especially since he doesn't have, as Arian said, he doesn't have Sam Acho's motor, which runs hot all the time. So Acho's going to get to the passer more often just because his energy level is above everyone else's on the field at all times, and that's how he lives his life off the field too. His energy level's way up, and so his motor is hot all the time, and so there's that effort. He doesn't ever give up on plays, and he's going to make plays because of it, and he's faster.
Yeah, I mean, and there's reason that Okafor went in the 4th round. I mean, you know, he's a outside edge player that can't rush the passer, and the value of those in the NFL is what it is. And I mean, look at Matt Shaughnessy, for instance. Shaughnessy had a nice year for the Cardinals. He was a free agent, and did he even go on a visit? I don't even remember.
He went on a visit to New England. I don't know if he did the visit, but he went to New England, and then I think it was almost like a Kiesel type situation. He went to New England. I think it was a little bit leverage-wise, and then he came back to sign with Arizona.
Yeah, and he signed a 2-year contract for $4.5 million, basically. And that's all he's done so far. You know, and he's 27. I mean, he's young. It's not like he's an old player looking for a final payday. I mean, he's a young guy that's phenomenal against the run, and I don't think anybody's going to tell you differently. But when you can't get to the passer in the NFL, you don't serve a purpose in terms of value, and that's just the unfortunate reality of it. So, like you said, do they need counter moves? That could possibly be it. I think it's just that they don't. That's, you know, not their strength, and kind of you just have to be okay with that. It's not something you want to be okay with, but at the time, you know, kind of you play the hand you're dealt, and you have dominant run-stopping guys at a lot of different positions. So that's what you go with.
Again, this is Revenge of the Birds Radio, talking Arizona Cardinals football. We're talking aftermath type things of the Minnesota game with Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. If you have any comments left, if you're still on the line live, give us a call, 646-478-5622. 3787. We've got a few minutes left on the show. Let's start with the left guard situation. It's kind of an interesting thing. Jonathan Cooper has a toe injury, hasn't been quite the elite player. He's shown flashes. Arian said a couple weeks ago, hey, Watford's doing great. He's going to push Coop. Then he says, hey, Larson, once Lyle's back, he just might be our starting left guard. What do you make of this merry-go-round of left guard, or is it just talk? Is it just trying to push Cooper? Is Arians proving to be very impatient when it comes to injured players, and will that prove to be a problem, especially when you've got an elite talent like Cooper and he's not quite back where he is? Do you need to push him more? Do you need to understand him more? What's your take on with Arian seeming? I mean, I know he's trying to praise Larson and he's trying to praise Watford, but at the same time, what are you doing to Cooper? What's your take on that? Lost you for a second, Seth. So, I still see you online.
You didn't lose me. I forgot to hit the unmute button. Sorry. I think the litmus test is going to be Tyrann Mathieu. I think the fact that he was, actually on the field and played well, and then got injured, and now is coming back from an injury, versus Ryan Williams and Jonathan Cooper, who have really never done anything impactful in a game situation. I know Cooper was, as that quote-unquote beast in the preseason last year, but he's never actually done anything in a game that matters. So I think that's where Arian's impatience comes in, at least for me. So we'll see what happens though with Mathieu. If Mathieu, gets out there and practice tomorrow, and all of a sudden he's like, okay, I don't feel like I'm myself. I want to hold back a little bit, and 3 or 4 weeks from now, he's like, okay, I think I'm going to give it another try, and then God forbid it's not a full go, and he says, okay, I'm going to hold myself back a little bit. Then we'll see how Bruce Arians reacts, because I think that will be the first time we see a player that's actually been on the field and been an impactful player on the field on game day, coming back from an injury, see what they do, versus Cooper, who, again, we talked about it, was a 12-week injury when it happened, and now you're talking about a year later. I mean, we're almost a year to the day later. I think we're 5 days away from when he was injured, and then you're talking about, okay, when are you going to, get on the field and start showing your worth as the 7th pick in the draft? Because that's what it's all about. It's about maximizing value, and at this time right now, the Cardinals are losing value in their 2013 draft class because of injury. I mean, you have Cooper, you have Minter with the conflicting pectoral issue reports, you have obviously Mathieu with the injury. Okafor last year was injured all year, so it's just it's been a
Swope,
lot of
Swope on top of that
never played. Yeah, so you're talking about you're not getting a lot of value, and that's where you're kind of judged as a GM, is where you get your value. And injuries, unfortunately, are part of the deal. And I think that's what frustrates Arians the most, is he came from Pittsburgh, where those guys, I mean, you kind of just look at the history of the Steelers, they didn't have a lot of injury guys that were on and off the IR and things of that nature. So that's what all of a sudden he's dealing with that, and I just don't think that's how he plays. He's old school. He wants his guys out there, and like you said, I think he might be getting a little impatient.
Well, and in the end, it seems like, and maybe I myself am feeding into this media frenzy of the overreaction. Maybe I'm doing it. I probably am. That's fine. In the end, what's going to happen in opening is probably going to be Jonathan Cooper out there, and he's going to play well. Is he going to be Alan Faneca this year? Maybe the second half? I don't know. Once he gets his legs going, obviously there's a little bit of balance issues still going on. I think he's been really pleased with Larson, and the fact that they're really pleased with Larson, I know, is a little bit worrisome to you, especially when they talk about using him at guard because of his because of the metrics say, no, don't put him at guard. I think it's simply... Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, you know what? He hasn't done really anything well in the run game, but again, I think that's just the offensive line as a whole. But he's been really solid in pass protection. So, again, you're talking center versus guard. So we'll see what happens if he does play at guard this week and what happens. But, I mean, is Lyle back yet? Do we even know that?
Well, he was doing minor work. I think Lyle's expecting to practice tomorrow or Wednesday. Let's use Wednesday since we're on the internet. He's going to practice Wednesday. Arians is talking like he'll be back to play this Sunday. We'll see. We know how Bruce can be. So it'll be, who knows? Everyone never fractures his leg. No big deal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so I think, I mean, let's wait until, I guess, as you said, the media frenzy part of it. But let's wait and see what happens on Sunday. If Sendline's at center and Larson's at left guard and, Cooper is running with the twos or, is still not back, maybe then we can start to become a little concerned. A little? Because, I mean, you're talking about a guy that's played in 3 preseason games in his 2 years in the NFL, so you still don't have any idea what he has on game day. Then I think it is concerning because you really don't want Cooper to have to get a ton of reps in the 4th preseason game where guys are trying to make an impression, and so there's a lot more reckless play going on, if you will.
Yeah.
So I think you'd like to either see him back now or maybe, like you said, maybe it's week 1, and week 1 is when you start the march to Canton for Jonathan Cooper.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's turn to a topic that actually is something I saw you bring up. I think it was on Monday on Twitter, and it's about Stepfan Taylor, who appears to have been overtaken as the number 2 running back. Again, Bruce Arians said that there really wasn't going to be a number 2 running back. But again, can't always believe him. More situational packages, et cetera. But it appears that Jonathan Dwyer has seemed to pass him up. I know, based on what I've seen, that it looks like he'll definitely be the goal line guy. But we saw Dwyer running with the 2s and Steph running with the 3s. And what was you posed the question, what was it? Which would we rather have? Would you rather stick with Taylor or see what other guy is out there if you're talking about a 3rd running back? Is that the question you were asking? I can't remember exactly.
Yeah, it was basically come time for cuts, if you get a guy like I don't know any names right now, but let's just say Ryan Williams, obviously not Ryan Williams, but, a guy with a little more home run ability, if you will, gets cut and is available. Would you rather see him than a guy like Steph Taylor that, through however many preseason carries he's had and, the few carries he had last regular season, he just doesn't seem like the type of guy that's going to do more than the minimum. I think he's averaged like under 3 yards a carry in his career. Obviously, it's, again, limited carries in preseason and regular season combined, but he's just not really a dynamic runner at this point. And
he's what you called, Richard, he's a volume runner. That's what he did in Stanford, because he'd get lots of carries, and because he's strong and he's strong and consistent, he's going to bust off a few 9, 10, 15, 20-yard gains, but in the context of getting 20 to 25 carries.
Exactly. And so all of a sudden, in the 4th quarter, if you ran the ball 20 times already, then maybe you get 5 carries for 35, 40 yards on a drive, and then you look up at his numbers and he had 25 carries. The first 20 went for 70 yards. The last 5 went for 40 yards. So all of a sudden he's got 110 yards on 25 carries and
that's a fantastic game. Yeah.
And everybody's like, "Oh, that's a great game." It's like, well, it's a great game statistically, but for the first half, you're talking about 3 yards, 3.5 yards a carry. Is that really what you want from a running back? And I think the answer is no. But, again, with Coach Arians, you really never know what you're going to get. Just Taylor's just not a super dynamic guy, and that's kind of what it boils down to. So you'll wait, you'll see what happens, and maybe come after week 3, there's an interesting name on the waiver wire that offers maybe a little something more than Stephon Taylor does. Maybe a guy like a LeGarrette Blount. Again, not saying LeGarrette Blount, but a guy like that who's a big back that has done it in the NFL, has been, the type of contrasting back to what Andre Ellington is, and that's you can be comfortable with outside of Jonathan Dwyer if, anything happens to Dwyer.
And then my point, I think I chimed in on this conversation as well, is if he's a third running back, he's cheap, he pass blocks, why not? He does the job and he knows the system, and it's unlikely you're going to get someone who, in your third running back, those are more traits that you need. Somebody who's specialized, someone who is reliable, who's not going to fumble the ball, somebody who can catch some passes, who can pass block, rather than, say, a Ryan Williams type guy who can be much more dynamic but doesn't give you much else other than that. The issue would become is, what if Jonathan Dwyer does go down? Yes. Or if Dwyer just isn't that effective, and so you have to turn to the third guy. Let's pose this question. Obviously, Robert Hughes has a place. Would you rather have a Stephon Taylor, or would you rather have a Jalen Parmalee? Or are they the same guy?
Parmalee hasn't, and it's so hard to judge these running backs because the offensive line, again, hasn't been great in terms of run blocking, but I think they're kind of the same guy. A guy like, for instance, and I don't know what his status is with the Redskins, but like a guy like Silas Redd. I don't know if you've watched any of the Redskins games, but he's looked He's looked, fairly good. He's a guy that was decent at USC, then had the knee injury and is, getting healthy finally, and he's really, obviously the Redskins rushing attack has always been solid because of that, zone scheme, but he's a bigger back that can do a couple things, kind of a between the tackles guy, contrasting to Ellington, more in the style of Taylor, just with a little better feet, and I think that's what you kind of want to see. Again, like you said, Taylor offers exceptional pass blocking, reliable hands. He's not going to fumble the ball, and he's a guy that you can put out there in any situation and be comfortable. But I don't know if anything happens to Ellington or Dwyer, if he's the guy you want carrying the ball 12 to 15 times a game.
The other question is actually one that Steve Kime sort of brought up, and that's with the receiver depth. I've said all along since the start of camp, since the start of the preseason, they're going to keep 6 receivers, especially now with Jerron Brown playing the way he is. He's a lock at number 5. And then they drafted Walt Powell for a reason, and he hasn't been bad. He's been good at what he's done. And so they're not going to draft a guy who has shown talent. They're just not going to dump him, especially when other teams will see that talent, and you might be able to go to the practice squad. But really, I'm trying to think of the past few years. The only draft pick that I've seen them that comes to mind now that they drafted, and there's a couple that they drafted, then cut, then brought back to the practice squad. One, Quan Sturdivant, a linebacker that really disappointed, ended up doing nothing. And Brandon Keith, the right tackle a few years ago. But he was a 7th rounder. And so I don't see that happening. But then Kime brought up the possibility, maybe trade. So who would you trade? Would they try to trade Golden? Would they try to trade Jerron Brown? Because they like the upside of Walt? Would they try to trade Ted Ginn? Do they try to, do you think that there's a viability of trading one of those receivers, or would you just roll with those 6? I know you raised the question that Ted Ginn really doesn't have any value at receiver anymore. That with the emergence of the two Browns, and then the little bit of development from Powell.
I mean, for me, the part I always struggle with in terms of trades in the NFL is what are you going to get for a guy? I mean, Britton Golden is 26, and he's not really played very much. Obviously, that's his trek to coming to the NFL, part of that. But you have to look at, okay, what's his value going to be? I mean, you're talking about a guy with 4 receptions in 2013, and yeah, that's it. So he's got 4 career receptions. Who was you brought up the guy, and now I can't even remember who it was, where you talked about, who was the all-star wide receiver for the Cardinals in preseason past.
Stephen Williams was one of them.
Yeah, Stephen Williams. That's who you brought up the other day. The Cardinals ended up cutting him, and I think he's still in the league somewhere.
I think he's in Miami now. I think he's stuck on with Seattle for a bit. I think I read somewhere he's in Miami. So I'm not sure, but I think he's in Miami.
Yeah, so I mean, it's hard to be like, oh, you can get something with this guy. Everybody thinks you can get something for somebody until you actually try to go trade somebody, and then you can't get anything for him. But I think Tyrann Brown is actually a guy you could trade. I just don't know if I would trade, because you're talking about a guy that's similar in size, and that's the only comparison I'll make, but similar in size to Larry Fitzgerald. So if you're talking about kind of replacing Fitz next year, and after he has to move on because of the salary issue, then maybe you're okay with keeping him. But I think he's really outside of the big three of Floyd and Fitz and John Brown. I think Tyrann Brown would be the only other one with any trade value, because I don't even think anybody would really give up much for Ted Ginn at this point.
Yeah, probably not. So I don't see it as viable, because especially a lot of those guys, especially at the back end, Tyrann Brown there's the potential he's better than you think he might be, or that he's looked like. But the truth is, back of the roster receivers, there are a dime a dozen. Why would you trade for one unless you see something absolutely fantastic in them? Those guys you can pick up the waiver wire, you can pick them up off the street. Heaven knows we've seen a lot of them come through. Your 5th receiver might see time in a game. Which brings us to our final topic. Just before we just make this quick, because we just a couple minutes left on the show, is practice squad. The NFLPA and the league came to agreement there. They loosened the restrictions. They expanded the practice squad to 10 players rather than 8, and 2 of those players can be veterans, so they could be on the practice squad now, even when previously they were ineligible, which might be a good move. That might be a positive thing for a guy like Jalen Parmalee, or even perhaps Ryan Lindley, even though I don't know how much time he would get, even as a practice squad guy. Do you like the changes of practice squad? I think it's fantastic for the league overall. I'm glad to see that the NFLPA did it, because it gets more players into the league, which that's what they want to do. They want more players in the league. It's good for player safety, because then you have, if there's injuries, you have more players to elevate to the roster who know what they're doing, so they're going to be less likely to put themselves in a situation to endanger another player in terms of safety. I like it across the board.
I agree, and you kind of hit the nail on the head. You're talking about a guy in Ryan Lindley. Parmalee is another interesting one you brought up. Kind of that fullback, halfback hybrid guy that's been around the NFL for a long time, has played in only a handful of games, but I mean, he's been in the NFL a long time. Maybe you can keep him, on your practice squad, and then, God forbid anything happened to a Robert Hughes, you bring him up and to kind of fill that Hughes, again, that quote-unquote fullback role, even though the Cardinals don't use a fullback, fill that fullback role that we've seen a little bit with Hughes. Another guy, and I'm just kind of going through the roster and who's done some stuff. I thought he was awful in Game 1, and I thought he played a lot better in Game 2, was John Estes, the center.
Yes.
He's, I thought he was really bad, again, in Game 1 against Houston, but I thought he played pretty well in Game 2. He again, like the rest of the offensive line, he looked really comfortable in pass protection. He kind of, I don't know if he would be that veteran type guy. I'm trying to look and see if he's played in any career games in the regular season, because he's a 2010 draft pick, so he's been in the around. Yeah, so he's got some games in his career, but only one, so he would qualify in the old sense as well. But he's a guy that maybe you'd like to see, especially with the injury uncertainty along the interior offensive line at this point, and the ineffectiveness of Earl Watford when he was given his first opportunity. Sorry, I'm just kind of going through the names on this roster. Darren Fells, if they didn't have the Jake Ballard retirement, would have been another guy that would have.
It allowed them to keep a guy like Andre Hardy too, who is kind of the other Darren Fells.
Yeah, that's a good one, Andre Hardy. That is an excellent point right there. A guy that maybe you can sneak on. I don't know, Anthony Steen on offense. I don't know if he'd pass through waivers, to be completely honest. The other guy, and we didn't talk about him, was where'd he go? Darrell Johnson, the outside linebacker. He played really well in the first game. Didn't do as well in the second game with more reps, but again, another solid run defender. He offers a little bit more burst off the edge. Maybe he's a guy you can sneak on and add on. Glenn Carson, again, another undrafted free agent linebacker. I think for the Cardinals especially, because all of a sudden that inside linebacker position is this kind of this target for injury, suspension, and just all these things that have gone on. You want to keep as many on the roster and in the system as possible, kind of like you talked about, and allow them to not have to worry about those type of things. So, overall, I think it's a great thing for the NFL, because it's going to give a lot of young guys the opportunity to hang out and learn the game, and maybe, after 2 or 3 years, make an impression enough to get a shot to play in the NFL.
All right. Well, that'll wrap it up, folks, today, wherever you're listening to, whether it's live, whether it's via download. Thanks for listening. That's Seth Cox. This is Jess Root. We will have a guest, Scott Bansel. I am bringing him on and talking to him on Wednesday from Cincy Jungle, SB Nation's Cincinnati Bengals blog. And we will preview the Bengals game coming up, and I believe that will be on Revenge of the Birds probably Thursday morning, if you're listening to this show before then. But Cardinals fans, thank you for listening. This is Jess Root. That's That's Seth Cox, Seth Cox. Have a good night, everyone.
Have a good one, Jess.
You've been listening to Revenge of the Birds. Keep the conversation going by visiting revengeofthebirds.com. Follow us on Twitter at Revenge of Birds. You can also find us on iTunes at facebook.com/Revenge of the Birds.